Good morning. Usually I get pretty nervous before I preach, but over the last couple of weeks I had a life-changing experience where I don't think I'll ever be nervous public speaking again, and that is helping Vanessa teach the 2nd through 5th graders on Wednesday night. We had a class the past few Wednesdays where she wanted me to teach on baptism and salvation, but also to answer any questions that they might have about the Bible or God or heaven or anything. So we spent all last Wednesday talking about where God came from and who made God and how the devil interacts with our lives and all sorts of questions that scholars have been trying to figure out for years. So if I can handle that, I'm pretty good up here. This is really easy compared to what I've been through these past few Wednesdays. But I'm really excited to be preaching this morning. Generally speaking, when I preach, I would prefer to preach out of a text rather than a topic. I love going through a text and breaking down a text. When I'm not doing that, it's because there's something I'm passionate about. As we would have it this morning, there's a certain text that I'm passionate about. So it's kind of a 2-for-1 deal where I get to preach on something that I'm passionate about and preach in a way that I'm passionate about preaching, which is breaking down a text. But moreover, breaking down a narrative, which I love breaking down biblical narratives and stories. And it will be really helpful with this little clicker. I love going through stories and seeing what we can learn from the characters, what we learn about God from these stories. And the story we're going to be looking at this morning is 1 Kings 18. And it's a story many of you guys might be familiar with. It's Elijah on Mount Carmel. Now, just to set the stage, I'm going to offer a very brief synopsis of this narrative. So basically, for those who have not heard the story before, what happens is Elijah is the only prophet in all of Israel who is speaking on behalf of the Lord, on behalf of Yahweh. And there are 450 prophets for Baal, the false god. So Elijah proposes this contest, and the rules of the contest are as follows. They assemble on Mount Carmel, and the prophets of Baal build an altar, and Elijah builds an altar. And whichever god brings fire to the altar is the God who is real. So the prophets of Baal cry out and prophesy, and Baal fails to bring fire to the altar. And of course, Yahweh, our God, sets fire to the altar. So that's just a basic summary of the story. And now we're going to go look at the details, because the details of the story are so significant. And the more I read this story, the more I really truly believe that this might be the most significant Old Testament narrative that speaks to our lives and where the church is today. I could be wrong. I probably am wrong. I didn't break down every single story, but I know this one has a message that is really powerful. So before we begin delving into the details of this story, just a little bit of context. First and foremost, we need to know that Ahab is king of Israel at this time. 1 Kings 16:30 says that Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. So we have this picture painted of a very wicked, very evil king, so evil that he was more evil than any other king before. And what was it he did that was so evil? Well, he not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, but he also married Jezebel, daughter of Ithbaal, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him. He set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria. Now, it's really important that we understand the God that Ahab is trying to get Israel to worship is Baal. And that's because Baal is the god of rain and storm. And now, this is significant because when Elijah comes along, the first thing we see Elijah say in all of Scripture is to promise a drought on Israel. It says, "Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, 'As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word.'" So from Jezebel's perspective and from Ahab's perspective, this shouldn't be a problem, because the God that they serve, Baal, is primarily the God of rain and storm. So it really shouldn't be an issue that some other prophet of some other god is claiming that there will be a drought, because well, we know Baal is the one who takes care of that, and he's got our back. Well, it turns out it was a problem. It was a really big problem. We see in 18:1 at the start of this story that after a long time, in the 3rd year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah, "Go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land." So at this point, we know that the drought has been going on for 3 years. Very long time, very serious problem. Also, we know it was a very, very dark time in Israel's history because we see in 18:4 that while Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and had supplied them with food and water. So Israel's going through a drought. Their king and their king's wife is promoting Baal, building temples and altars for Baal, promoting this false god. And Jezebel, his wife, is literally killing off all of the Lord's prophets. And so that's where we are. That's kind of the situation when this story begins. Now, Act 1, I'm going to break this story down in acts, much like any old Shakespeare play. So Act 1, the first part of this story, is when Elijah confronts King Ahab. It says in 18:17, when he saw Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you trouble of Israel?" This is Ahab talking to Elijah, blaming him for the drought, blaming him for Israel's problems. Now this raises a very, very interesting question because Ahab, as far as we know, believes in Baal, has been serving Baal, the god of rain, the god of storm. So why would he then be blaming Elijah for this drought? And that makes us wonder just exactly that. Why would he blame him? It doesn't make any sense, so much so that the only option is that maybe Ahab really doesn't believe in Baal. He might believe in him in some sense, but at the very least, he clearly doesn't believe that Baal is very powerful. And we have a picture of this man whose faith in Baal is not very strong. He's kind of on the fence about whether or not he really, really believes in Baal. But then that raises the question, why is he promoting Baal? Why is he building temples for Baal? Right? Why would he build altars and temples for this god that it doesn't seem he really believes in? It doesn't seem that he really thinks Baal is that powerful. And then our mind takes us back to the woman, Jezebel, right? It's the woman's fault. It seems like that's a really popular thing for people to do in Scripture is blame the woman. We see that very early in Genesis 3. And it makes a lot of sense that Jezebel would be the one who's the most responsible. She is the one who is pure evil. She is the Baal apologist. She is the one who is the full-fledged idolater. She's the one whose name lives in such infamy that no one will ever name their daughter after her. Like Jezebel is so evil and seems to be the one responsible for promoting Baal. But when we go back and look at 1630, Jezebel's not the one who gets the blame. It's Ahab, son of Omri, who did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. Now, he wasn't a prophet of Baal. He wasn't really an apologist. He didn't even really apparently believe that Baal was strong enough to help end the drought. But he's the one who is blamed for all of the evil that takes place in Israel. And what this tells us is that being weak-willed, being soft, sitting on the fence, being wishy-washy about evil is no excuse for allowing that evil to take place when it's under your control. We are just as responsible as Christians for sins of inaction, of sitting on the fence, of allowing evil to transpire, than we are for actually committing those evils and atrocities ourselves. This reminds me of the famous quote from Malcolm X, "If you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything." And Ahab didn't stand for anything, and he allowed this super dark period to take place in Israel's history because he couldn't stand up, he couldn't pick a side one way or another. So as Act 1 of this story concludes, and we see Ahab as kind of on the fence, wishy-washy, yet being responsible for all this evil, Elijah proposes that all of Israel and the prophets of Baal assemble on Mount Carmel. He says, "Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring me the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." And that's where we are when Act 2 begins. Now, Act 2 is the interaction between Elijah and the people of Israel on Mount Carmel. We go to verse 21, where Elijah went before the people and said, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." And this line is crucial. But the people said nothing. Elijah goes out on a limb and bears his soul full passion to these people. And they just look at him. Thousands of people. just blank stare. You ever bare your soul to someone or get really upset or share something that you're really passionate about with someone and just get the blank stare looking back at you? It's funny, I've probably gotten more blank stares in the year that I've been married than I did my whole life before I was married. And deservedly so. And that's because I get upset about a lot of things that Jessica thinks are stupid, and she should think they're stupid, because they are. I'll be sitting in a room watching TV, and the light is on in the dining room, and Jessica will be going back to the bedroom, and she'll turn off the light, and I'll say, no, can you turn that light back on? And she'll say, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were using it. I say, well, I'm not using it, I just like having it on. I was getting comfortable with the energy of the room, light here, not here. And she just looks at me like, so confused, as if, why would you need this light on? And it's just thousands of little things like that where I'll get upset at something that she doesn't understand, and then she'll get upset with something that I don't understand. And this blank stare that we give each other, and that I'm sure you guys, based on the laughter and reaction, I'm sure have experience with that, it indicates that the two parties are on an entirely different page. It's for the most part because they don't really care or they don't really understand. So when Elijah bears his soul to these people saying, why are you wavering between two opinions? Why don't you pick which God to follow? The people stare back blankly because they don't get it. Like, they don't understand. They think, well, I didn't really know it was that big of a deal. It didn't seem important to me. Like, why does this even matter? And now, before we go any further with that point, it's important to understand that what Elijah is doing is calling them out on their idolatry. And now we've all heard stories in the Old Testament about idolatry. And generally we do a good job of taking, Israel's idolatry and connecting it with our idolatry. We, for the most part, understand that as Christians, we don't struggle with this. Like, I'm not going to go out, I'm not going to be tempted to go out Friday night with my friends and worship a golden calf. Like, that's not what idolatry means to us. We do a good job of making the connection and making the comparison to our modern day idols, which are things like our job or money or school or a relationship that we hold in too high of esteem, or our hobbies or our interests, or even our favorite sports team, which is really significant on this day for March Madness. And so the conversation or the sermon or the lesson on idolatry in the Old Testament and how it connects to us usually is summarized in this sentence. In the same way that Israel worshiped Baal, we tend to worship our idols, but we need to worship God. And that's good. That's very good. But I'm convinced that somewhere in this process, we've missed something crucial. Because the prevailing thought among Christians today seems to be this: I may have my idols, but as long as I'm worshiping God too, then I'm okay. And the problem with this is that's exactly what Elijah was upset with Israel for. We tend to assume that Israel's problem was that they would absolutely go this way and totally abandon Yahweh over here so that they could worship this idol. And then when they would come back to Yahweh, they would be over here and totally ignoring the idols. But very, very rarely was that the case. Israel's main problem was that they wanted to worship Yahweh, but they also wanted to worship Baal at the same time. They wanted to worship Yahweh, and they wanted to worship Asheroth at the same time, or any other foreign god. Very rarely was Israel strong one way or the other. So when Elijah asked them the question, how long will you waver between two opinions? He's not saying, when are you going to stop worshiping Baal and start worshiping God? He's saying, when are you going to start worshiping God alone and God only, and leave aside your idols? Israel was caught in the middle between two opinions, between two gods. And that was Israel's problem, and now it's our problem. Being caught in the middle, being stuck between serving God and serving our idols. Being stuck between serving God and our job, in our school, and our hobbies, and any other various idols that we may have. Another way to describe this is as being lukewarm, as not really being fully passionate and fully sold out for Yahweh. In his book, Crazy Love, Francis Chan talks about the idea of being completely all in, completely sold out for God, versus the idea of being lukewarm. And in one of the most convicting chapters of any book I've ever read, he breaks down what it looks like to be a lukewarm Christian. The chapter is called The Profile of the Lukewarm, in which he discusses what lukewarm Christians live their life like. Now I'm going to read very, very brief synopsi of some of the things that he says lukewarm Christians do. Don Mathis always likes to say, when you say, you stepped on my toes, and he says, well, I was aiming for your heart. Just remember that this is aimed at our hearts, not our toes, although your toes might be a little sore after this. So this is what Francis Chan describes as a profile of the lukewarm. He says that lukewarm Christians give money to charity and church, but only as long as it doesn't affect their standard of living. Lukewarm Christians don't want to be saved from their sin, only the penalty of their sin. Lukewarm Christians rarely share their faith with those around them because they don't want to be rejected by the world. Lukewarm Christians gauge their moral goodness by comparing themselves to the world. Lukewarm Christians make Jesus part of their lives, but only a part. He isn't allowed to control their lives. Lukewarm Christians only love those who love them in return or have something to offer them. Lukewarm Christians are moved by people who do radical things for Jesus, but seldom act themselves. Lukewarm Christians are thankful for their luxuries and comforts, and rarely consider trying to give as much as possible to the poor. They are very quick to point out that Jesus never said money is the root of all evil, only the love of money is. Lukewarm Christians do whatever is necessary to keep from feeling guilty. They want to be considered good without it requiring too much of them. Lukewarm Christians are always worried about playing it safe. They never take risks for the sake of God's kingdom. Lukewarm Christians' lives are structured so that they never have to trust God. If something bad happens, they have plenty of money saved up and plenty of food in their refrigerator. Lukewarm Christians pray before meals and at bedtime, but that is the only time that they spend with God. Lukewarm Christians drink and curse less than the average person, but other than that, their lives aren't that different than those of non-believers. Generally speaking, lukewarm Christians' lives would be hardly different at all if they stopped being a Christian tomorrow. So when Elijah asked Israel this question, how long will you waver between two opinions? How long will you serve God and Baal? This question, to me, jumps off the page to us and beckons to us the question, are you lukewarm? Are you somewhere in the middle between serving God and serving your other idols? And the difference, I believe, between being a lukewarm Christian and being someone who's completely sold out, completely on fire, is not whether or not you go to church on Sunday. It's not whether or not you generally have good morals. It's not whether you tithe, and it's not whether you pray before every meal. It's, do you go the second mile? Do you love your enemies? Are you set apart? Can people tell that your life is different? Can they? How different would your life outside of this building be if all of a sudden tomorrow you decided to stop following Jesus? Would people be able to tell a difference? And so with this question looming over us, who will you follow? God or your idols? We're now move into Act 3 of this story. And we get to decide for ourselves which God is worthy of being followed. Elijah says, or 1 Kings 18, 23 through 24, Elijah says, get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord, the God who answers by fire. He is God. Then all the people said, what you say is good. So this is the parameters of the contest we talked about in the summary. The prophets of Baal will build an altar and see if Baal sets fire to it. And then Elijah will build an altar and see if Yahweh sets fire to it. So as we move into Act 3, wavering, sitting on the fence, not sure if we want to continue following both or commit one way, we now have the chance to see what our idols are like and what God is like. So this is where in Act 3, Baal fails to set fire to the altar, and we see the fate of those who follow Baal. Now I want to point out 2 things about the prophets of Baal, and I'm going to do that after I read this scripture. 1 Kings 18:26, talking about Baal's prophet, says, so they took the bull given them and prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. Baal, answer us, they shouted, but there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar that they had made. So the first thing I want to point out about the prophets of Baal and anyone who follows their idol is that they've been ignoring the evidence that suggested otherwise. Now remember, Israel has been in a drought for 3 years. And Baal is the god that these prophets believed was in charge of rain and storm. So they had no reason whatsoever to actually believe that their idol could do anything. Yet here they are screaming, yelling, dancing from morning all the way until noon. Now this process continues. It's in 1 Kings 18:28. It says, "So they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed." Now the second thing I want to point out about what happens to these prophets who follow their idol is that serving their idol literally caused them pain. This is what their experience was like serving Baal. It was loud, hectic, chaotic, and extremely painful. Now, both of these points about following idols for the prophets of Baal are true for us when we serve idols. I'm convinced if any of you out there have chosen not to follow God, but to follow your idols, you will find these two things to be true. And that is that you are ignoring the evidence regarding who is and is not God. If you've been drifting away from God, following another idol, whatever it is you're looking for, I guarantee you haven't found it. Because that idol isn't God, and you are ignoring that pain and the fact that that false God is false and not providing you with what you need and what you're looking for. And two, much like the prophets of Baal, pain, the text points it out, became their custom, and it becomes our custom. Following idols, following our false gods, leaves us so empty and causes us to feel so much pain and so much helplessness. So much so that we don't even realize it. It becomes our custom, it becomes our habit to live helpless lives in this state of pain. And so, through this, it becomes clear that there is only one God that we should follow. And that's what we see in Act 4 when the Lord sets fire to the altar. 18:33 through 35, talking about Elijah, it says, "He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, 'Fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood.' 'Do it again,' he said, and they did it again. 'Do it a third time,' he ordered, and they did it the third time. The water ran down around the altar and even filled the trench." Now, we understand that he's doing this so that when this altar catches on fire, there will be no doubt that it was an act of God. And that's exactly what happens in 1 Kings 18:36 through 38. It says, "Elijah stepped forward and prayed, 'Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again.' Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench." Now this comes as no surprise to us, mainly because I told you guys what was going to happen at the very beginning. Should have issued a spoiler alert for that, I apologize. But it comes as no surprise to most people, Christians reading this for the first time, because we know when these stories happen in the Bible that God usually wins. Like, it's not a surprise for us to read this and see, oh, okay, yeah, God won the contest. He set fire, Baal didn't. But think about this from the perspective of the people of Israel who were watching, who had lived their whole lives sitting on the fence in mediocrity, wavering back and forth between God and between Baal. Now for them, they had never in their life picked one side or the other. Not only had they never picked one side or the other, but they had probably never seen anyone pick one side or the other. This was the first time that they had ever seen anyone go all in on behalf of their God, Yahweh. And so when they finally see this, when they finally see one person who goes all in and God comes through, this is their response. It says, "When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, 'Yahweh, He is God. Yahweh, He is God.'" They had no choice, once they saw what it looked like, to go all in, to go all out, to know that their God was truly God. So what about you? Are you on the fence? Are you wavering between two opinions? Are you back and forth, serving God here, serving your job here, serving God here, serving a relationship here? I think that a lot of people have very, very small faith in God because they take very, very small leaps of faith. A lot of people don't believe God to be very big because they never give him a chance to be big with the way that they live their lives. And what we see in this story is that the one time God was given a chance to come through, the one time someone went all in for God, he came through in a huge way that left the people with no option but to believe that he is God. So for those on the fence, back and forth, wavering, wishy-washy, not sure if they want to be all in for God or not, or maybe they are sure but they haven't done it. For those of you who are there and are thinking, maybe I should jump off the fence, maybe I should commit to being all in for God, I can tell you based on this story and based on the rest of Scripture exactly what's going to happen is that if you step over here and serve God and God alone with all of your heart and let him control your life, you will be left with no other option but to believe that this God, Yahweh, the God of Israel, is the one and only true God. There is no other. So maybe that's where you are this morning. Maybe you're on the fence, maybe you're wishy-washy. And we've all been there and we all are there to some extent. But that's the invitation that we're offering this morning. If you're on the fence and you're ready to jump off, if you've never even thought about even being on the fence, if you've been over here and you want to come over here, if you're ready to commit, if you're ready to give God a chance, if you're ready to take a big leap of faith so that you can see how big our God truly is, you can come forward. And if you have any other needs, come forward as we stand and sing. Thank you.